auditor that space and angle. So it may be a little bit too taggy, but just I guarantee you there will be no hand waving math, right? Because my background has been on basically, enable client with bleeding edge technology to solve the business problem. So, so I'm gonna share my screen. I have a little presentation slide prepared, and feel free to kind of like, to stop me for questions and clarifications and things like that. So.
Okay. So thank you, Lucas.
Yeah. So I mean, so I'm gonna quick dive in there right away. I mean, more from the technology angles than because I wanted to kind of have a deeper dive on how we can implement the solution, because I think from the idea introductions and risk management framework, I look at the documentation, it looks really kind of well prepared and comprehensive. So I mean, I'm coming in more from the technology angle, how we can put this on the ground, basically. So I mean, just to have a quick background, probably some of you guys may know this already, but I mean, just kind of spend a quick minute so then we can lay some foundation for further discussions. So I mean, like artificial intelligence is pretty like generic terms and things, but I mean, like pretty much high level is how we can use computer system to perform human tasks. I mean, things like visual perceptions or speech recognitions and decision makings and translations and all sorts of like kind of complicated human tasks. But now, like with the newer computer systems and things, we can, basically try it. I mean, back then people tried it with the Big Blue where they can play chess and stuff, but then that was probably more like a brute forcing complex rule. It doesn't really learn at all. In the good old day where the Big Blue with the IBMs and stuff that basically beat a Russian chess master and all that. But with like machine learning, it's a little bit more bigger domain where we learned from the algorithm. We feed new data and then we refresh the model. That's what the new learning is all about. Because back then the computer wasn't able to do a lot of automations in terms of refreshing and ingesting a large amount of the data, doing computation with like complex algorithms. But now with the modern computer, we can do all these. So machine learning really start like blossoming. And along the way, like you may hear some other like terms like deep learning. So deep learning is a really subfield of machine learning. So you think of it like, these are typically more complicated tasks. If you break down your vision, what we are seeing, you see a lot of different, one picture, you have actually a lot of objects in there, right? Your computer has a button, a screen, and a little knot and things like that. So what deep learning is really like decomposing like every single element within a picture. So then they will have like one layer of one feature, such as a knob, a screen. So then they're stacking it together, so make it very complicated. So that's why they call it deep learning, is they stacking a lot of little things, let's say in your vision. So there's a lot little information stacking it up, make a very deep network. So that's how they call it deep learning. So they basically like doing a lot more like complicated tasks. And then like, we were gonna talk a little bit more on the like, natural language processing, which is have a lot of overlap of machine learning, deep learning, and then also like computational linguistics. So, I mean, then we'll kind of quickly talk through like, in general, when we have, let's say a third-party risk assessment or any risk assessment, a lot of the time is a question and an answer situations, right? So we ask a security assessment question, and the provider will provide the the answer about like, how do they contain or mitigate the risk or the control around the risk that the client will propose, right? I mean, mostly these applications will be used for the service provider, such as, let's say, cloud platform provider. They have subscriber on top of it, or people accessing services or software providers, things like that. They will have a lot of assessment question, people coming in, and they have to put behind a lot of resources to answer those questions. So if we need to like decompose, like when it comes, like what kind of question it comes in and how do we tackle it in a lower level situation? I mean, there are times that, I would basically, you think of it, this is more a triaging problem, how we can help the industry be able to automate it. It's a little bit more on like, traditionally we're putting bodies behind the desk and answering these risk assessment questions. So now, like, it's more a triaging problem in a sense that how can we have the machine handle a lot of standardized homogeneous questions with large volume that they kind of somewhat repetitive, and then we'll put behind the expert for unique questions that will require human touch. So then, like, we can kind of reorganize the resources for other, important tasks, so that instead of having them sit behind the desk. So high level, it's, pretty much, I think we are tackling more on two types of questions. One type is where company will have a question and answer bank. They have a standardized question, and then they have the standardized answer, and then wherever the way that the client comes in to ask a question, we can find a matching for them. Or the other types of question is what people typically call like question and answer, like Q&A and Q&A. Like people know IBM Watson back then was playing the Jeopardy, the Jeopardy games. That it's a question and answer, right? So you throw out a question and then they will give you the answer, or more like a comprehensive. For our scenario, a lot of the time we do have a policy or our risk control policy that we have a context based on, when people ask, like, how often do you change your password? And based on policy, you can say 30 days, 80 days, whatever days, that based on, it's like a machine comprehension. So, I mean, high level wise, I mean, this is the framework that we use. It's high level. It's really like, on the RFM, it's the assess, that's where we are focusing on. So I think we talk a little bit on the natural language processing is, a branch or the field that kind of combining computer science, computational linguistics, and artificial intelligence. The benefit of it really is, we can understand large amount of natural language data, and also it's pretty consistent and unbiased outcome. And this is, I kind of like, get the chart from NYU, one of the course, because I think not only natural language processing, the other part of it is natural language understanding. In a way, we wanted to understand the intent, the context of the language. So like, this is kind of how NYU interpreted more formal, definition, how, NLP overlap with like computational linguistics. So these colored areas is where, like, using complex structured mathematical models to really understand the context and the intent of the language. So, I mean, now I'm going to take it a little bit examples to walk you through what we are dealing with. I mean, because the good old days, I mean, a lot of people would use keyword and key phrases to identify, like, because I think one strategy is that you guys in another document was saying that, can we categorize when it comes to a security assessment question? Can we categorize this question to a particular domain so that within the domain, I can go find the answers? Because, like, typically, let's say from SIG or from other framework or industry framework or NIST, they have a lot of control, materials that may or may not relevant in terms of, like, for that particular question the client asked. So, I mean, how can we quickly find it, the relevant answer or relevant question and answer pair? So I think, like, one quick strategy is how can we identify this question belongs to which domain? So I mean, keyword key phrases is one typical strategy, but then like, we know like, from this example, keyword key phrases is not going to cut it because, I mean, the same keyword is like, backup media. So it's like, oh, our backup media and restoration procedure test annually. This is more like a business continuity type of domain, versus the next one is like a data destruction or data retention destruction requirement that includes information on live media, backup media, and information managed by subcontractor. So, I mean, this is more like related to data retention domain. So, I mean, then the next one, then how are we going to solve this? Is we really have to combine the keyword and also what we call like the context word or the context within the sentences, because the procedures and test is probably like related to the continuity context compared to data retention requirement. Really, it's related to the data retention topic. So how can we identify these subtleness on context? So right now, basically, we're using, like earlier, we were talking like the deep learning. So, I mean, one of the important part of the what people call it like the deep learning is, in the classical statistical learning and the good old world, we assume every data point is independent from each other in a sense that they have no memory, because they try to kind of, make every prediction is independent. Just like the stock movement yesterday, Tesla went up, I don't know, like 5% or whatnot. If I need to take the data from the past to predict the future, so the classical assumption is the event happened in the yesterday is independent from today. So there's no relevancy or whatnot. Every day is an independent date. So the drawback of this is basically you can't retain any memories. But then, like especially in linguistic context, your words around your key, I was the center word or the key subject, which is here is the backup media. The word around it is really important to tell you what the topics and context is all about. So learning the things in between is extremely important. So, I mean, the bleeding edge technology really is right now, they're using deep learning to understand, the context over here. Because like, just the keyword and key phrases is not going to cut it. So I think like, right now, I mean, the important takeaway is keyword is not going to cut it. Knowing the context is super important. Then the deep learning is like one prominent way that like everywhere is using, especially like some of the vendor that we are seeing. I guess we can name, I mean, I don't work for OneTrust, but I mean, OneTrust, they do have a solution. Behind the scenes, I believe they're using like, deep learning to kind of have the automation questionnaire capability. So behind the scenes, they're really using that type of technology to use it to automate, to understand the questions and categorize it and be able to provide relevant answers. And then the second piece of the technology is super interesting and super important is it's what we call word embedding. And this is like, actually Google and Facebook, they open source, this piece of technology. What it does is basically we are encoded every single word into a unique number in a sense that, because computer cannot compute or underneath is all 1010 switch. So they cannot take alphabet characters in there. Characters in there like English characters. So in a sense that basically everybody will convert into a number for encode every word into number. So we can put that into a learning to learn the distance, how these words like happened frequently in general English. So Google used 6 billion words in news and also Wikipedia to learn like, millions of like, these English words, how usually they are distributed in a 3D context that like, for example, assess password privacy and empowerment. You can see like access and password. Typically, when they use these two words, they happen to be like fairly close, or very often they will use it together. Or privacy and password, like fairly, in general, when they use it, it's pretty close. So this is like, in a general English word or in general English context or domain. But when it comes to, so this, like, that's why, like, they are, like Google open source these like technology for people to build things on top of it. That's right. But then, like, for our scenario, because with security and privacy practitioners, where like, environment can be like, really used often in access, password, privacy, asset. These things should be, much more used in the context of like the documents, control policies, and things like that. You can see those words used much more often. So what we are seeing it is in the industry is they will retrain or relearn the frequency of these words to knowing the context. So then, like, they will have a solution for that specific domain. So I mean, like, then I guess like these are, I'm trying to kind of providing a view for like these fundamental building block technology, like word embedding and also natural language understanding. And the last is like, we're gonna, we'll leave some questions and Q&A time for you guys, but I wanted to show you the implementation in our work environment. How do we help clients to really put these on the ground, right? So, I mean, the first scenario, the client typically will have a question and answer, like FAQ, or frequently asked questions, providing with the answers. And then, when people ask the same question, they could be asked in a number of different ways. So we use, word embedding, natural language understanding to creating the match, right? Because on the left-hand side is the client question, the right-hand side is the question from the FAQ. So how can we kind of pairing the right candidate? So then the risk analyst, when they seeing it, they don't have to look up the whole Q&A FAQ. Instead, like they're just looking up every question. We provided like 3 candidate returns. So these are the, like, let's say the segregation of the duty questions coming out from the client, and then we look it up from, let's say, the Q&A bank from SIG. So then we're providing like 3 candidate answers from there and provide like based on the confidence score. So then, like, the time will be saved a lot more because the analysts will just have to focusing on picking the right one coming out from the candidate, or none of them is a good candidate, and they will look for it, and then they'll go back from the drawing board. I mean, or from ground zero again. But I mean, like every question we provide in candidates, question and answer pair is substantially saving the time. So this is like, the input is just client question and answer bank, but and output is pretty much, a candidate question and answer pairs from the Q&A bank. And then the next one is a little bit more sophisticated. And, and also this is a very hot field in the AI and machine learning is what we call machine comprehensions. So you think this is more like, doing a reading comprehensions, but it's the machine doing it. So what the kind of key ingredients are, key inputs are the questions, and also a piece of paragraph with the text that can, that could potentially providing the answer from that piece of paragraph. So we also implement some of these technologies in the sense that, so we have a password policies, from Robert Half. So we can see like, these are the password policies. And then the question coming out from, the client, when they ask a question like this, looking for the PIN procedures and things like that, So this is the blue highlight is the standard answer. The red highlight is where the machine returns. So in a sense that like the maturity of the technology is really there in a sense that like, it can help to give a fairly good directional answer coming out from a text, because these are like, you're providing a piece of context, paragraph and a question, and then the machine will actually looking for the right answer based on your questions from the context piece. So, for this, just wanted to give you guys a little bit flavor of like where the technology stands in terms of, like really puts it the automations for risk assessment on the ground. So, I'm going to take a pause here, and then pretty much I want to kind of leave some time for you guys to ask questions and things like that. Because, I really want to honor the time with you guys for like up to 2:30. So we have like 6 minutes for the Q&A.
Thank you, Lucas. Anybody who has questions, feel free to go ahead and ask right now. You can unmute or type it in the chat if you would like. Well, while we're waiting for that, I was alluding before, as a former chief audit executive and being tasked with auditing cybersecurity and networks and access and all those great things that we used to do in a standard world. It's no longer standard. I think you really open our eyes to that here. You've got me thinking, because I recognize some of those standard questions you would ask, right? Everybody had your checklist that auditors would follow, but that's just not sufficient anymore. That's really no surprise to me, but when you actually presented it like that, Lucas, it really kind of hit home that, like a lot of things, we got to have to think differently and adjust and kind of outsmart the AI in some way.
Right.
Bottom line.
And also, I think the other interesting use of the technology is, I think back then when we tried to do the gap analysis for the controls and stuff, if we do it like one-to-one by hand, like comparing the list, or other frameworks, it's so time consuming because it's so long and it's so big, right? But then we did implement some technology with the client that we can compare list UCF on this 853 version 3, version 4, version 5 side by side, and identifying the gap on the control pretty quickly within like a day or so. We just basically load it all in, find out the commonality across the framework and what they're lacking when they don't have it. So then they can get a really quick first shot, within a day. So then to identify where the gap is and things like that. So those are, you think of it like, the risk that happens so fast. So the containment should be like have a, comparable time to respond to it, right? Or control. Because it shouldn't take so long to kind of identify those, given where we are with the technology today.
Yeah. What used to be a very manual effort in the past too has definitely changed. Sitting down and interviewing people about what they do and their process and everything is just, that's moved forward tremendously as well. I actually think it's for auditors to stay educated and get up on the latest things to do. I always felt like auditors are chasing after where technology is going. We lag behind. By the time we figure out and catch on, it's already 2 or 3 years into it. And that's one of the things within the IIA is, trying to figure out how do we at least keep current, if not ahead.
Right. And thank you, Lucas and Bill. Yes, I think the basic premise, like I mentioned earlier when Sri was presenting, we want the promise of AI. What is the promise of AI? However, the more transparency we have and how we know that these systems are being built securely and according to what we, then we can trust the outcomes, right? And that is really the bigger and the best question. So Lucas, absolutely, I love what you presented. This is an ongoing issue with security, right? Vendor risk assessments.
Mhm.
How do you make them more manageable? Because we don't have the ability to take this at a snapshot level anymore. We did a security risk assessment of a vendor in the beginning of the year for Q1, or for when the auditors were going to come in, like Bill, and we have to show them that this was done, but it was done.
Right.
You have a frequency. The thing is,
Mhm.
everything is changing so dynamically. How do you keep your hand on that pulse? So very, very.
And also you think of it, a lot of the a lot of the vendors' volumes are coming out from the lower risk category. But if you couldn't put it in a across the board risk assessment, then it's basically you will have a resources challenges to kind of really going through, the risk assessment.
Correct.
Because they're chewing up a lot of your resources. If we can think of a way to automate the lower risk part and then put the resources on the medium and high risk vendor, that's probably a more sensible thing to do, in the sense that you can still have the comprehensiveness to do your risk assessment. And then you can put the resources on more like complicated and important, vendor or assessment, because you don't kind of, running around for different levels of the risk.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Great information, and we appreciate everything you've just done. So, and
thank you.
Everybody here, thank you, Lucas.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So we are here. Go ahead, Pam. You had something?
Yeah, Bill, no, I'm good. Thank you. Want to bring up your next slide, because you were going to leave at 3, correct?
Right.
No? Okay, so I thought I'll just help you by bringing it up.